Understanding Dual Unity. By Walter Russell. The two moving lights are projected through each other from the static one to create the illusion of the idea they but manifest. Behold in me the one light from which a seeming two lights appear as pairs of rhythmically interchanging opposites. These are my light messengers. They are my workers which build my imaged forms and give them back to me devoid of form. Father-mother principle of building bodies by dividing light into polarized units. Note that the male and female both co-create with a positive charge, but their polarity is different. There are 2 points of rest in every cycle. At each of these 2 rest points each opposite condition reverses and becomes the other. Day is a contraction of light waves into visibility. Night is a reversal of the cycle. Light waves expand and become invisible. The name of that great divider of rest into two-way electric motion is polarity. Polarity is the controller, the measurer, and the surveyor of electric intensity of desire in mind for the actions-reactions needed for creative expression. Out of my light of knowing are my 2 lights of thinking born as sexed pairs of opposites for repetition as sexed pairs of opposites. Again I say, I, the light, am one. But my thinking is 2, for thought is 2 in every repeating thing, 2 halves of one which never can be one. Always must they be 2 to go opposed ways from me and back again to me for reborning from the other one after finding rest in me. There need be no mystery as to whether light is corpuscular or wave, for waves of motion which simulate the light and darkness of space is all there is. Corpuscles of matter are 1/2 of wave cycles of light. Space is the other half. Light is all there is in the spiritual universe of knowing, and simulation of that light in opposite extensions is all there is in the electric wave universe of sensing. Together these constitute what we call matter and space. It has been difficult to conceive light as being purely corpuscular, for light is presumed to fill all space. Space is not empty. It is full of wave motion. Corpuscles of matter are 1/2 of wave cycles of light. Space is the other half. These 2 lights of thinking are God's messengers, workers, and represent the light and darkness of space, corpuscles of matter and wave cycles of light. They are also represented as 2 pillars. Jaken and Boaz, the 2 pillars. Since the dawn of civilization, the entrance of sacred and mysterious places have been guarded by 2 pillars. Whether in art or in architecture, twin pillars are archetypal symbols representing an important gateway or passage towards the unknown. The pillars are named Jaken and Boaz and represent one of our culture's most recognizable symbol, prominently featured in architecture, art, documents and buildings. This article will look at the origins of this timeless symbol and its esoteric meaning. The concept of twin pillars standing at the gates of sacred places can be traced back to ancient civilizations. Separately, their power is one, joined, they are 2 powers which may destroy or harm one another. A gateway. The symbol of the twin pillars have, since time immemorial, guarded the gateways to holy places and mysterious realms. They mark the passage towards the unknown and the otherworldly. In ancient Greece, the Pillars of Hercules was the phrase that was applied to the promontories that flank the entrance to the Strait of Gibraltar. The northern pillar is the Rock of Gibraltar in the British territory of Gibraltar. According to Plato's account, the lost realm of Atlantis was situated beyond the Pillars of Hercules, in effect placing it in the realm of the unknown. Renaissance tradition says the pillars bore the warning nec plus ultra, also non plus ultra, nothing further beyond, serving as a warning to sailors and navigators to go no further. Symbolically, going beyond the Pillars of Hercules can mean leaving the foulness of the material world to reach a higher realm of enlightenment. The frontispiece of Francis Bacon's New Atlantis featuring the Pillars of Hercules as a gateway to a new world. According to occult lore, Atlantis is the civilization from which all Hermetic knowledge emerged. The rebirth of this lost kingdom has been the dream of mystery schools for centuries, and he reared up the pillars before the temple, one on the right hand, and the other on the left, and called the name of that on the right hand Jaken, and the name of that on the left Boaz. 2 Chron. 17. Very likely some of us have wondered what was the meaning of these 2 mysterious pillars set up by Solomon in front of his temple, and why they were called by these strange names, and then we have dropped the subject as one of those inexplicable things handed down in the Bible from old time which, we suppose, can have no practical interest for us at the present day. Nevertheless, these strange names are not without a purpose. They contain the key to the entire Bible and to the whole order of nature, and as emblems of the two great principles that are the pillars of the universe, they fitly stood at the threshold of that temple which was designed to symbolize all the mysteries of being. In all the languages of the Semitic stock the letters J and Y are interchangeable, as we see in the modern Arabic Yaqub for Jacob and the Old Hebrew Yahweh for Jehovah. This gives us the form Yachin, which at once reveals the enigma. The word Yak signifies one, and the termination Hai, or hen, is an intensitive which may be rendered in English by only. Thus the word Jaken resolves itself into the words one only, the all-embracing unity. The meaning of Boaz is clearly seen in the Book of Ruth. There Boaz appears as the kinsman exercising the right of preemption so familiar to those versed in Oriental law, a right which has for its purpose the maintenance of the family as the social unit. According to this widely spread custom, the purchaser, who is not a member of the family, buys the property subject to the right of kinsman within certain degrees to purchase it back, and so bring it once more into the family to which it originally belonged. Whatever may be our personal opinions regarding the vexed questions of dogmatic theology, we can all agree as to the general principle indicated in the role acted by Boaz. He brings back the alienated estate into the family, that is to say, he redeems it in the legal sense of the word. As a matter of law, his power to do this results from his membership in the family, but his motive for doing it is love, his affection for Ruth. Without pushing the analogy too far, we may say, then, that Boaz represents the principle of redemption in the widest sense of reclaiming an estate by right of relationship, while the innermost moving power in its recovery is love. This is what Boaz stands for in the beautiful story of Ruth, and there is no reason why we should not let the same name stand for the same thing when we seek the meaning of the mysterious pillar. Thus the two pillars typify unity and the redeeming power of love, with the significant suggestion that the redemption results from the unity. They correspond with the two bonds, or uniting principles spoken of by St. Paul, the unity of the Spirit which is the bond of peace, and love, which is the bond of perfectness. The former is unity of being, the latter, unity of intention, and the principle of this dual unity is well illustrated by the story of Boaz. The whole story proceeds on the idea of the family as the social unit, the root conception of all Oriental law, and if we consider the family in this light, we shall see how exactly it embodies the twofold idea of Jaken and Boaz, unity of being and unity of thought. The family forms a unit because all the members proceed from a common progenitor, and are thus all of one blood, but, although this gives them a natural unity of being of which they cannot divest themselves, it is not enough in itself to make them a united family, as unfortunately experience too often shows. Something more is wanted, and that something is love. There must be a personal union brought about by sympathetic thought to complete the natural union resulting from birth. The inherent unity must be expressed by the individual volition of each member, and thus the family becomes the ideally perfect social unit, a truth to which St. Paul alludes when he calls God the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named. Thus Boaz stands for the principle which brings back to the original unity that which has been for a time separated from it. There has never been any separation of actual being. The family right always subsisted in the property even while in the hands of strangers, otherwise it could never have been brought back, but it requires the love principle to put this right into effective operation. When this begins to work in the knowledge of its right to do so, then there is the return of the individual to the unity, and the recognition of himself as the particular expression of the universal in virtue of his own nature. These two pillars, therefore, stand for the two great spiritual principles that are the basis of all life, Jaken typifying the unity resulting from being, and Boaz typifying the unity resulting from love. In this dual unity we find the key to all conceivable involution or evolution of spirit, and it is therefore not without reason that the record of these two ancient pillars has been preserved in our scriptures. And finally, we may take this as an index to the character of our scriptures generally. They contain infinite meanings, and often those passages which appear on the surface to be most meaningless will be found to possess the deepest significance. The book, which we often read so superficially, hides beneath its sometimes seemingly trivial words the secrets of other things. The twin pillars Jaken and Boaz bear witness to this truth. The Masonic usage of the terms Jaken and Boaz originates from the biblical account of King Solomon's temple. The master builder of the Temple of Solomon was Hiram Abif, a prominent figure in Masonic ritual. The verses 1 Kings 6:1-38, 1 Kings chapter 7, and chapter 8 describe the dimensions, the construction and the dedication of the temple under Solomon. One passage describes more specifically the twin pillars standing in front of King Solomon's temple. 15 For he cast 2 pillars of brass, of 18 cubits high apiece, and a line of 12 cubits did compass either of them about. 16 And he made 2 chapiters of molten brass, to set upon the tops of the pillars. The height of the one chapiter was 5 cubits, and the height of the other chapiter was 5 cubits. 17 And nets of checker work, and wreaths of chain work, for the chapiters which were upon the top of the pillars, 7 for the one chapiter, and 7 for the other chapiter. 18 And he made the pillars, and 2 rows round about upon the one network, to cover the chapiters that were upon the top, with pomegranates, and so did he for the other chapiter. 19 And the chapiters that were upon the top of the pillars were of lily work in the porch, 4 cubits. 20 And the chapiters upon the 2 pillars had pomegranates also above, over against the belly which was by the network, and the pomegranates were 200 in rows round about upon the other chapiter. 21 And he set up the pillars in the porch of the temple, and he set up the right pillar, and called the name thereof Jaken, and he set up the left pillar, and called the name thereof Boaz. 22 And upon the top of the pillars was lily work, so was the work of the pillars finished. 1 Kings chapter 7. The account of Solomon's temple is of great importance in Freemasonry as each detail of the building holds an important esoteric meaning. The twin pillars act as a portal to the mysteries by standing on each side of the entrance to a sacred place. Aleph may be interpreted as man or the creative, Bet may be interpreted as woman or the receptive. 1 is the principle, 2 is the word, A is the active, B is the passive, the monad is Boaz, the duad is Jaken. In the trigrams of Fohi, unity is the yang and the duad is the yin. We now know that assigning gender to universal principles may not be beneficial to ourselves or society, and most often, are false. Therefore we transcend gender assignments in our wording and understanding. Boaz and Jaken are the names of the 2 symbolical pillars before the principal entrance of Solomon's Kabbalistic temple. In the Kabbalah these pillars explain all mysteries of antagonism, whether natural, political or religious. They elucidate also the procreative struggle between man and woman, for, according to the law of nature, the woman must resist the man, and he must entice or overcome her. The active principle seeks the passive principle, the plenum desires the void, the serpent's jaw attracts the serpent's tail, and in turning about upon himself, he and she, at the same time, flies and pursues him and herself. Man and woman is the creation of God, and universal creation is the bride of the first principle. The permanent alliance of reason and faith will result not from their absolute distinction and separation, but from their mutual control arid their fraternal concurrence. They elucidate the procreative struggle between man and woman. According to the laws of nature, the woman must resist the man, and he must entice or overcome her. Such is the significance of the 2 pillars of Solomon's porch, one named Jaken and the other Boaz, one white and the other black. They are distinct and separate, they are even contrary in appearance, but if blind force sought to join them by bringing them close to one another, the roof of the temple would collapse. Separately, their power is one, joined, they are 2 powers which destroy one another. For precisely the same reason the spiritual power is weakened whensoever it attempts to usurp the temporal, while the temporal power becomes the victim of its encroachments on the spiritual. Human equilibrium requires 2 feet, the worlds gravitate by means of 2 forces, generation needs 2 sexes. Such is the meaning of the Arcanum of Solomon, represented by the 2 pillars of the temple. The combining of the 2 opposite forces of the twin pillars produced the cinder pillar. The perfected man, in the mysterious Sephirothic tree of the Jews, these 2 pillars symbolize mercy and severity. Standing before the gate of King Solomon's temple, these columns had the same symbolic import as the obelisks before the sanctuaries of Egypt. When interpreted Kabbalistically, the names of the two pillars mean "in strength shall my house be established." In the splendor of mental and spiritual illumination, the high priest stood between the pillars as a mute witness to the perfect virtue of equilibrium, that hypothetical point equidistant from all extremes. He thus personified the divine nature of man in the midst of his compound constitution, the mysterious Pythagorean monad in the presence of the duad. On one side towered the stupendous column of the intellect, on the other, the brazen pillar of the flesh. Midway between these two stands the glorified wise man, but he cannot reach this high estate without first suffering upon the cross made by bringing these pillars together. The early Jews occasionally represented the two pillars, Jaken and Boaz, as the legs of Jehovah, thereby signifying to the modern philosopher that wisdom and love, in their most exalted sense, support the whole order of creation, both mundane and supermundane. The column on the right, which is called Jaken, has its foundation on Chakma, the outpouring wisdom of God. The three globes suspended from it are all masculine potencies. The column at the left is called Boaz. The three globes upon it are feminine and receptive potencies, for it is founded in understanding, a receptive and maternal potency. Wisdom, it will be noted, is considered as radiant or outpouring, and understanding as receptive, or something which is filled by the flowing of wisdom. In other cultures, wisdom is attributed to the female, and compassion to the male. The three pillars are ultimately united in Malkuth, in which all the powers of the superior worlds are manifested. To begin with, these pillars were either brass or bronze. In either case they came from a combination of sun metal, that being copper, and moon metal, that being either tin or zinc. This mixture of sun and moon expressed harmony and balance. Passing through these pillars represents a chance for a new beginning. The fact that these pillars were hollow made an opportune vehicle to store one's baggage of the past, as the lodge does not regard or remember the faults of a novitiate prior to joining the lodge. In addition, the pillars may be seen representing two out of the three pillars of the Tree of Life, the Jewish mystical symbol for the creation of the universe. The names of the three pillars of the Tree of Life were often seen as strength and wisdom, with the third pillar being harmony, placed between them. Thus, when a candidate passed between them, he and she in essence becomes harmony, and enters a life in which the spiritual dominates the physical. High priestess of the tarot, La Papessa, or the Popess, wearing her triregnum or papal tiara, sits between the pillars Boaz and Jaken. As with most occult symbols, the twin pillars conceal multiple layers of meaning, some intended for the profane, others divulged in the higher degrees of Freemasonry. However viewed, the pillars as stated earlier represent the equilibrium of two opposing forces. Aside from their dimensions, in New York Rite Masonry the pillars are most often seen with a ball or globe placed on top. In essence, the pillars most likely had a bowl, one containing fire and the other water. The celestial globe or fire bowl surmounting Jaken symbolized the divine man, the terrestrial globe or water bowl symbolized the earthly man. The pillars represent divine energy, the sun and the moon, sulfur and salt, and many other forms of polarity. The door placed between them leads to the house of God, and standing at the gates of sanctuary they are reminded that Jehovah is both androgynous, both male and female, and an anthropomorphic, having human qualities, deity. The parallel columns also denote the zodiac signs of Cancer and Capricorn, which were formerly placed in the chamber of initiation to represent birth and death, the extremes of physical life. Freemasons know them to represent the summer and winter solstices, or a more modern comparative appellation would be the two Saints John. When the two pillars find equilibrium between them, it will signify the union of the Sushumna and the Kundalini. This sacred marriage will create a fire mist to radiate throughout the human body, filling it with divine light. It is then that humanity will become the third column of the temple wisdom. He or she will be a column formed by the combined forces of strength, Jaken, and beauty, Boaz. This act forms the lost word in the vibratory system of the soul's physical embodiment. The meaning of Boaz is clearly seen in the Book of Ruth. There, Boaz appears as the kinsman exercising his right of preemption, so familiar to those versed in Oriental law. The right of preemption has for its purpose the maintenance of the family as a social unit, the right to purchase back property to return it to the family it once belonged. In the story, Boaz brings the alienated estate into the family not only as a matter of law but because of his membership in the family, and his motive for doing so is his love for Ruth. So, there should not be a reason why the name of Boaz is attached to the mysterious pillar when we seek its meaning. Thus, the two pillars typify unity and the redeeming power of love. St. Paul speaks of the unity of the Spirit, which is the bond of peace, and love, which is the bond of perfectness. It is what St. Paul alludes to when he calls God, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named. In closing, these two pillars, therefore, stand for the great spiritual principles that are the basis of all life, Jaken typifying the unity resulting from being, and Boaz, typifying the unity resulting from love. This dual unity we find is the key or evolution of spirit, and the reason that these two ancient pillars has been preserved in our scriptures. They contain infinite meanings, which appear to be the most meaningless, but will be found to contain the deepest significance. The two pillars also signify the left and right hemispheres of the brain. Boaz is symbolic of the right hemisphere. This hemisphere is associated with the intuitive, abstract, and creative principle. In other words, it represents our higher, spiritual natures. The left hemisphere is associated with logic and the intellect. I also tend to associate this hemisphere with physicality and concreteness. Now let's see how this ties into the two pillars. The pillar of Boaz symbolizes the animating, source, energy in creation. The pillar of Jaken not only represents our intellect, but also our concrete, physical, earthly natures. And please understand that the lower nature is not a negative aspect of creation. Quite the contrary. Just as darkness is not a negative aspect of creation, neither is the physical. It is only when the physical aspects of our dual nature do not have a redeemer and guide, spiritual aspect, that the balance becomes compromised. As Jesus said, a man does not live on bread alone. So what's the real significance of these two pillars? The answer lies in the space that is created when the two pillars are esoterically and symbolically one. Just as the subconscious and conscious natures of our mind are married and joined to form the bride of Christ who is one with God, resulting in Christ consciousness, so these two pillars as one symbolize the pinnacle of man's spiritual evolutionary journey in a physical body. The result of that journey is the healed and balanced individual. Jaken and Boaz together then are symbolic of the balance, or equilibrium, between the two forces, active and passive, in creation. These two forces are symbolized in many different ways in many different cultures. Some of the more known are male/female, yin/yang, fire/water, spirit/matter, conscious/subconscious, higher, lower nature, divine man/earth man, etc. The point is that the fusion of the two brings balance between the forces of duality. This is a manifestation of God's presence. Now think about it this way: the temple represents you. How long did it take Solomon to build the entire temple? So he was 7 years in building it, 1 Kings 6:38. Why 7? Because there are 7 energy centers that consciousness must flow through in order to reach the consciousness level that correlates to the Shekinah glory of God. Just as it took Solomon 7 years to build the temple, so consciousness has to ascend upward through the 7 energy points of the holy temple, which is your body, in order for Christ consciousness to be realized. In Eastern religions, they are known as chakras. The invisible and subtle energy that flows up your spinal column and through your 7 energy centers is known as Kundalini. Different levels of consciousness can be associated with different levels of awareness. All of this relates to the assimilation and integration of energy, more importantly, information. This may make more sense if you think of energy as information in motion. In its physical aspect, everything in the universe can be described as energy. But from a spiritual aspect, it can be explained as information. So it is more accurate to describe the universe as a vast sea of information interacting with itself rather than energy. How else do the pillars of Boaz and Jaken relate to all this? Human DNA is the vehicle for genetic information in the body. Chromosomes are bundles of this information, and human cells have 23 pairs of chromosomes. With that being said, consider the scripture below. For he cast the 2 pillars of brass, of 18 cubits high apiece, and he made 2 chapiters of molten brass to set atop the pillars. The height of one chapiter was 5 cubits, and the height of the other chapiter was 5 cubits. 1 Kings 7:15-16. 18 plus 5 equals 23. The pillars of Boaz and Jaken are 23 cubits high, representing the 23 pairs of chromosomes in our DNA. This further confirms that these pillars represent what must happen in the body to achieve balance. Symbolically, when the 2 pillars are combined, Kundalini energy has risen through the 7 energy portals of your being, representing the Shekinah glory of God manifests in the temple, your body. If you remember the first scripture stated in this post, you will notice that lily flowers were mentioned. The Hebrew meaning of this word denotes a flower that is opened at the top like a trumpet. In Eastern religions, it is the open lotus flower that represents that awakened individual. But as you can guess, even though all of the spiritual information originally came from one source, over time different cultures express it with different names and symbols. What other correlations can we draw from this? Fire rested at the top of Jaken and water at the top of Boaz. Symbolically, when fire and water are mixed, you get fire mist, representative of Kundalini, the invisible and subtle cosmic spiritual energy. The purpose of this article was to teach balance, unity, and wholeness. This is the redeemed individual. It is the message of Christ. Jesus states, "Be ye therefore perfect even as your God in heaven is perfect." Matthew 5:48. The word perfect simply means whole. The esoteric paradigm of perfect is one of balance between our 2 natures, where the conscious implants good thoughts into the subconscious, and the subconscious then births a reality of love, acceptance, forgiveness, and gratitude. Your goal should be to achieve balance in life. Healthy eating, right living, and serious inner reflection, through prayer and meditation, are necessary. You are the only one that can walk into balance and wholeness. We are each to have dominion of this earth physical matter and share this space co-creatively, taking care of each other, animals and plants as best as we can, and using this temporary experience as a stepping stone to evolve spiritually. This is accomplished with God's source. It is important to let source energy flow through you, bringing spiritual and physical healing. This happens as a result of being balanced. When the energies of the 2 pillars equalize within our being, individually and collectively, we maintain life, encode the morphogenetic God field within the energy of duality, corpuscle and space. We may merge within ourselves, and transcend ideas of duality, by maintaining them. In synopsis, everything is good, everything is God. We are man-mind awakening to God-mind, immortal, eternal, divine sparks of source consciousness, evolving and journeying our way home, the divine presence, on a sacred pilgrimage, gaining experiences along the way, as we become unique, beautiful, masterful, wholesome expressions of life and God. We begin to see through our own mirages and aim to heal ourselves individually and collectively. As we purify ourselves and walk into our fullness, we become the fullest expression of our highest being. We maintain the 2 pillars of Jaken and Boaz within our being and become the sphere of destiny we are meant to be as we walk through the narrow gate towards life. We heal ourselves from seemingly endless cycles of war and harmful condition patterns. Let us remind ourselves that although painful, living from the lower self was a necessary experience for our lives and ever-expanding consciousness. Let us remember our true divine selves, and everything in our reality, as only a mirror of what is within us, and that the darkness and unawareness is trying to get our attention and teach us because it too requires healing.